Create That Life Legacy designers, Amber Prosia here. Welcome to episode number 20 of the Parenting Biz podcast, coming to you every Monday. Now let's chat with this week's featured guest, Deborah Wakefield. Deborah, are you ready to enlighten us on your journey of how you shaped up?
Sure am. Let's go.
Amazing. Deborah is a grandmother to 2 delightful children, as well as a mother to 4 grown and growing up children. Her children's birth are spread over 18 years. So Deborah has experienced maternity care in the 80s, 90s, and also in the 21st century. She is now a midwife, childbirth educator, and manager of her own very successful independent birthing class business entitled Empowered to Birth, with the catchy tagline of Birth Coaching for the Modern Parent. When you hear what she does and how she conducts her sessions, you will understand why the 21st century woman birthing in today's climate needs more help than ever before. Deborah completed her midwifery studies and fell into teaching at the hospital classes in Melbourne when the staff member was off sick. That was back in 2006. Since then, Deborah has studied childbirth education at the Royal Women's Hospital. She's trained in the Calm Birth Method and now trained under Melissa Spilstead in the Hypnobirthing Australia program. Deborah has also created her own new and exciting and interactive birthing class, which is taking off in her hometown and becoming the #1 go-to class for not just first-time moms, but those who felt they didn't have the skills they needed to get through their birth the first time. She is also part of the local positive birth movement, and as a volunteer gives of her time each month to take part in workshops and seminars. Deborah is so passionate about every woman's birth being the best it can be. Deborah, please take a minute to fill in any gaps from that intro and give us a little glimpse of your own personal life.
I think you've covered that very well, Amber.
Okay.
I'm really keen to share what I do with you and the listeners.
Fantastic. Well, let's get started then. And thank you so much, Deborah, for being on our show. We're really, really honored to have you here today. So thank you very much.
And I'm really excited to be here with you too.
Thank you. As you are aware, our listeners are parents or parents-to-be that realize ownership is key to not only to our parenting or business, but in life in general. And along that parenting journey, we can lose sight of that. However, if we focus on life as a game or an activity or a sport, not only can we learn to let go easier, but we can also gain strength from our mistakes and design our core focus to be one of laughter, joy, and most importantly, having fun. Just like a 5-year-old kid in the sandbox. So this week, our entire interview will be out on the water, rowing our way to a calm, natural birth and beyond with hypnobirthing. Now, as you all are aware, this is just an analogy and we can create and design our lives any way we want. Deborah, this was your chosen sport, so let's go through your daily habits and how you make it work with your life and expertise. However, before we begin and we get out on the water and we begin rowing, can you please explain to us what hypnobirthing is to our audience? Because I'm sure there's some people out there that might be thinking it's a bit too hippie or out there for me. So if you could just explain what that is, that would be super.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. Hypnobirthing, yes, as you say, a lot of people, when the woman tells her partner that she wants to do hypnobirthing, they say, "Oh no, that's too hippie for me. I couldn't do that." But it's actually not really hippie. Melissa Spilstead describes it as a fancy word for a calm and positive birth. So when we think of the word hypno, it kind of conjures up, it's based on hypnosis, and that for many people conjures up the image of a stage hypnotist taking over someone's mind, making them do things like cluck like a chook, and it's not like that at all. Hypnosis is a natural state of mind that everybody gets themselves into multiple times during the day. It's a little bit like daydreaming. And so hypnobirthing actually helps women learn how to tap into that part of their mind, how to do that instinctively. It teaches partners how to understand what the woman's doing in her birth process and how to support her in that zone. And there's heaps and heaps and heaps of strategies to help the woman get into that calm state. There's also techniques to help women overcome the fear that's often associated with birth, especially birth in the 21st century, because women like to tell women their horror stories around birth. Often the beautiful, calm, natural, nice births are not shared as much as the horror stories. And so I think a lot of women's pre-birth education comes from hearing other people's stories that are elaborated on, and then their image of what their birth can be something really traumatic and not the beautiful, calm birth that it can be. So it's about getting out those negative thoughts out of a woman's mind before birth so she can really concentrate on what she wants, not concentrating on what she doesn't want.
Absolutely. And just while we were talking a bit offline, can we just, as like a little disclaimer, we're going to be talking about Hypnobirthing Australia because there is different techniques or obviously procedures in the medical, like in hospitals around the world. So we will be talking a bit about Hypnobirthing Australia. Do you mind just covering that slightly and then we'll get into the elements of rowing?
Yeah, thanks,
Sure.
Amber. I think because we've had a lot of media publicity recently about Kate Middleton birthing her baby so beautifully and easily and quickly and popping out of hospital looking so gorgeous and glamorous. And yes, Kate Middleton did learn hypnobirthing to birth her baby, but she learned the UK method of hypnobirthing. And I believe that when you are learning something, it's best to learn locally. So in Australia, I believe Hypnobirthing Australia is the best course to study. There are international versions, there are American versions, but in Australia, absolutely go with the local knowledge, go with the instructors that have been taught what happens in Australian hospitals and are able to teach women Australian words, language, techniques. Of course, hang on, I better just go back there, that not every baby is born in hospital. Many are planning home birth as well. But what are the philosophies around Australian language and birth? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And procedures too, right? If you want to do the home birth and who's there to support, which I think is a great intro into our first element, which is as a coach. So when we're rowing, we need to have a coach there. And the number one goal for the coach is your safety as rowers. And it's actually individually too, right? Everyone is keeping their eye out. But just like a midwife's goal, it's for you and your baby to be ultimately supported and safe. So what exactly is the role of a midwife? And even just explaining what a midwife is would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Amber. We've just recently celebrated International Midwives Day, and just off air we were talking about International Nurses Day. So traditionally in Australia, somebody did their nursing training and then went on and did midwifery as a secondary qualification. And that's in the day where midwives were kind of the handmaidens to obstetricians. But recently, midwifery is a course all on its own. Midwives are the professionals in helping women cope through a normal labour and birth. Obstetricians are the specialists in complications and problems. Midwives are the specialists in normal pregnancy and birth. So in Australia, a woman can go through her pregnancy, labour, birth and her postnatal recovery just seeing a midwife because that's their speciality.
Beautiful. That's great. Thanks so much for that. And in your interactive birthing class, where do you actually begin teaching the mom to be or birth partner? Is it actually focused on the anatomy that's going on that we all have happening, or the medical equipment that the hospitals use, painkillers, parenting? Where do you actually begin?
That's a very broad question because I actually teach two distinctly separate classes. So the Hypnobirthing Australia class very much focuses on the way the uterus works, how the hormones help a woman cope with her labour, and as labour progresses, how things build and how things change within her body and how that whole process kind of evolves throughout the labour and the birth. And I think that's really important to know how the uterus is working, how the mind, how the thoughts influence how the body works, and that's really important. And Hypnobirthing Australia actually says that these techniques that you learn will help you cope with whatever twist and turn that takes place in your labour and your birth. And I believe Hypnobirthing Australia focuses so much on the normal, the natural birth, and it is just the most awesome course. But there are people who really want to know the nuts and bolts and the ins and outs of, well, if I do have complications, what does that look like? If I do need to have an induction, how does that process unfold? So in the birthing class that I have created and started to run locally, I go a little bit more into detail of on the medical side of when intervention is required, and let's face it, we do need to have intervention occasionally for the safety of the mother and baby. So not only do I focus on the normal anatomy, how the body works, how the hormones work, but then I roll that into what drugs are available, what's the effect on the mother and the baby of using drugs to get through labour, whether that be an epidural or an injection of morphine, or whether that be the gas. And then I keep going into, because 75% of first-time mothers who have an epidural will end up having either an instrumental or a cesarean birth. So I think that's really, really important to know. Mm-hmm. And what does that instrumental or cesarean birth look like? And how can that be a positive experience for a woman and her birthing partner? So trying to demystify and destigmatize surgical birth, and how that process goes.
Yeah, and I think you hit a really big point that I just want to reiterate, so that hopefully the audience has picked up, is that, hypnobirthing, is the focus of being and having a calm and natural birth. However, it's not being naive and ignorant of, if we need to have a C-section or emergency C-section, or something's going wrong with ourselves and our health, there's a complication, or the baby is not breathing, something, well then yes, there has to be other interventions, and you actually prepare your mind for that, for the potential of, there is a chance that to go off course. However, our first step and our first focus is to make it as natural and calming as possible. Would you say that is true, and you're just educating of knowing this is a potential, but it's not a focus?
True. And I think in life, where we place our focus is where we're going. And you've picked up on my rowing, and when you're rowing, you're actually going backwards, and it's your cox or your coach who's actually steering the boat and keeping you going straight. So sometimes you can be plodding along and heading in the wrong direction, and needing that encouragement to turn the rudder and get you back on course. Mm-hmm. And it's what you're focusing on is often where you're heading in life, and having the positive affirmations in your mind, having the belief in your body, having the trust in your baby, really do lead you in that right direction for the best outcome for a safe birth.
Yeah, and I love that you just brought up affirmations, because that is one big difference that I'm finding. So I am doing hypnobirthing, for those who do not know. I've been practicing hypnobirthing for the last couple months now, and I love it. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to our birth. We're really, really stoked. But the affirmations and the language that hypnobirthing uses compared to, let's just say, traditional birthing, labor, whatever you like to call it. If, for example, like contractions versus surges, could you just go into a little bit of the vocab differences between with hypnobirthing and traditional labor?
Yes, thanks, Amber. No, a lot of the words that we use in obstetrics and in midwifery are very anatomical words. They're very medicalized words, and it sometimes is a little bit intimidating to women when they hear medical words. And also, if one of the exercises that I do with the clients is I just get them to close their eyes and say the word contraction, and get them to think and feel and see how their body reacts to that word contraction. And a lot of them say that it's very harsh, it's very jarring, it's very medical, it's very intense, and it doesn't really sound very positive. A contraction is a description of what the uterus muscle is doing to open the cervix. Now, if we look at that in another way, and the word we use, surge or wave, and I get the couples to close their eyes, say the word again, and just see how that resonates within themselves. And when they use the word surge, they feel that that word is very powerful. There's a lot of action with it, but it's not harsh. Mm-hmm. And it actually sounds a lot more gentle, but it sounds very powerful. So it's a tiny little thing to change a word, but it makes a huge difference in the way the woman and her support person are approaching their labour, just by a tiny little change of language.
It's massive. And actually, I've been working with Mick on that. So that's my partner. And, the simple words about pushing. Do you mind going into that versus like bearing down?
Yes. Okay. The way a midwife will often try and teach a woman to push, it's very hard to describe what to do within your body to bear down. And often the way midwives end up just talking to women is to hold their breath and push down like they're having a really big poo, and hold that breath in and push, 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 push. And when you're actually teaching that, what we call our Valsalva push, it's actually depriving the baby of a little bit of oxygen. So the way we teach in hypnobirthing is to breathe that baby down. And the way I teach my clients is every time they have a poo to what we call the J breath. So it's a short breath in and it's a long, slow breath out, and it's using the diaphragm. It's tilting the pelvis forward and breathing out. And if you're sitting on the toilet and you need to have a bowel action, the pressure of that bowel contents, the baby's head is a lot bigger than a bowel action, let me tell you that. But it's it's the same part of your anatomy. It's the same pressure. It's a similar feeling, just a lot more intense when you're having a baby. So a woman is actually preparing and practicing and knowing how to breathe her baby out. And so with hypnobirthing mums who have been practicing this for weeks and weeks and weeks, when it gets time to birth her baby, she's familiar with that sensation, and her body knows what to do because she's been practicing it. And it makes it so much easier if she just puts into action what she's been practicing, rather than all of a sudden thinking, oh, now how do I push? There is an instinct, there is a reflex within our body that it's called the fetal ejection reflex. And another way I describe that is something that every woman has usually done in early pregnancy is vomited. Mm-hmm. Now, you get that feeling, you get that change within your body, you get that kind of welling up of saliva in your mouth, and it's like, here it comes, I can feel it. And it's like you don't do anything, you just open your mouth and out comes that vomit, which is a horrible thing to talk about.
No, that's okay.
And it's a horrible image to think of, but birth is beautiful, but it's messy and it's bodily function, and there's mess around. So I suppose talking about vomit is
minor.
Priming women to think about the messiness of birth. But when a baby is ready to be born, there is what we call the fetal ejection reflex. So the pressure of the baby's head on the posterior or the back wall of the vagina is very close to the pressure on the bowel, and the body will just take over, the body will just bear down, the body will just, as the uterus is tightening and forcing that baby down, the body will just eject that baby. So practicing the breathing techniques helps a woman work with the natural way her body's working.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, like I'll openly say, and I do apologize to our audience, but I am a very straightforward and honest person. That was one of the biggest techniques I really had to practice, was the J breathing, because I didn't even realize when I did go to the bathroom that I was holding my breath. And so then to go through it, but also what really helped me was the visualizations that hypnobirthing give you, because that's where I think a lot of people, when we hear the push, we want to, like you said, stop oxygen, stop breathing, and we're forcing things happening. But unfortunately, that's actually causing, I believe it's our cervix, so you correct me if I'm wrong on the actual body parts, but the cervix is closing and tightening, and unfortunately that's an increased risk to have a tear. And I'm kind of like, I do not want to tear. I want to relax the pelvic floor muscles and make it easier and trust my baby that it knows what happens. And so when you're doing that J breathing and having the visualization and knowing what's actually opening and breathing things through, then I believe it is the cervix. Am I correct on that?
The cervix is fully open by the time the baby is starting to come down the birth canal. So what you're talking about is absolutely right, but it's the pelvic floor muscles by that stage that Perfect. We want to relax. Yes.
Yeah. So is it the perineal then that's opening?
The perineum. The perineum is the skin on the outside between the vagina and the anus. That's the perineum, and that does stretch. But on the inside, there's that pelvic floor muscle, which is an absolutely fantastic, strong muscle that holds all our pelvic and then our abdominal organs in place. And it's really important to have a nice strong pelvic floor. It helps with sex, it helps hold our urine in, it helps, if we've got a little bit of wind in our back passage, it helps prevent us from passing wind when we don't want to. So a good strong pelvic floor muscle is important, but it has to stretch and it has to open. And that's why having a first baby, it takes maybe half an hour for that baby's head to advance,
Mhm.
stretch a little, go back inside. With the next surge, the baby comes down again, starts to open up that area a little bit more, and go back again after that surge is over. So it's a fairly slow process, especially for a first time mum, to get that baby's head round that kind of J bend in the pelvis.
Mhm.
And it's very healthy to actually take half an hour or more to get that baby's head into position, ready to pop out with the next surge.
Right. So then it's relaxing those pelvic floors when you're breathing out with the J breathing, right? So it's opening up and giving that space rather than contracting and holding that in, which commonly people do.
Yes, and the
Yes,
other
right?
thing too with that,
Yeah.
Amber, you've probably been practicing making sure your jaw is relaxed, your face is relaxed, because there's a bit of a correlation between your facial muscles, your jaw muscles, and your pelvic muscles. So often a woman might be afraid and she might clench up and tighten her jaw, and that's a common response with fear. But when hypnobirthing mums are not afraid of birth because they've practiced so many techniques, they're much more easily able to relax those facial muscles, those jaw muscles, and that also relaxes that pelvic floor muscle and makes that birth so much easier and calmer.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing too is the patience, because like how you said it, that whole portion could take at least 30 minutes. Where maybe you're used to, again, if you're thinking of bowel movements, and that's what you're used to, saying push and bear down and all that kind of stuff, right? You might not be sitting down on the toilet for 30 minutes. It might be, nope, I only go when I have to go. It's right there. Like I always say, turtle heading, a little bit more graphic, but like let's just say if that's when it happens, you just want to go to the bathroom, get it done, and get out. Where now you don't want that when you're in labor, right? Because you want to be patient, you want it to be calm and gentle and not tear and have complications at that point. So I think is that correct? Like, have you found a lot of people with struggling with even patience of it because they didn't realize the
Yes,
time?
some mums that I've seen, like I'll put my midwife hat on here rather than my hypnobirthing practitioner hat.
Sure.
But if I take myself inside the hospital to assisting women in birth who are fearful of birth, they haven't done any birth preparation, they're not sure what's going on, they get afraid, they don't like that feeling of the perineum stretching, and they think the harder I push, the quicker I can get this baby out. They're sometimes the women who actually do themselves some damage because the midwife is generally seeing that baby's head crown, seeing that largest part of the baby come through the perineum. And midwives will tell a woman in advance, I'm going to get you to stop pushing and start panting. And it's really, really important because that's the time where the baby's head, if we can have that last little, the widest part of the baby's head come out gently, and obviously after the widest bit, you get down to narrow around the
Mm-hmm.
neck, and then the shoulders. So, with a baby actually coming out, it's very important that we slow that process down at that point because baby's head has to turn over its shoulder. I'm just doing this with my head as I'm talking here, but if the listeners can imagine turning your head quarter of a turn, so you're looking over your shoulder, and then extending your head backwards to go over the opposite shoulder. That's how a baby gets out, by extending its head. And then it has to bring its head back to the center and line up with its shoulders, and then bring the shoulders out one at a time. So it's usually lots of surges to bring that baby's head through the down through the cervix, down through the vagina, down through the perineum and out. Once that baby's head comes out, then it's usually one contraction, one surge. We just wait for that baby to what medically we call restitute, or
Mm-hmm.
just turn its head back to line up with its shoulders.
Yeah.
And then with the next surge or the next contraction, the shoulders come out one at a time.
Yeah, no,
So
totally.
there's often about a 5 minute delay between the head being born and the rest of the body, and the baby completely being born.
And I think just knowing that time frame, and educating yourself, like as a woman about to give birth, knowing that time frame, it just eases that pressure that we possibly could be putting on ourselves, or from the videos or movies that we may have seen where it doesn't seem like it takes that long.
Yeah, and it's not only the woman who's birthing, because we are in the 21st century, and usually the father or the partner or the birth support person has gone through the classes with the woman, and sometimes it's the birth support person who is panicking more. It's like, oh, the baby's head's out. Why isn't the baby out? And why is it blue? And it's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? So I find couples that have done their preparation with the Hypnobirthing Australia program or another quality birth education course, they are aware that babies aren't pink and pretty when they first come out. They're often blue because they're not breathing, and that's fine if the cord's pulsing. Their head's quite misshapen because they have to mould those 5 separate skull bones to fit over each other to fit through the birth canal. And they're slimy. They're covered in mucus and blood, and it's not a babies are pretty, they're beautiful. But at the moment of birth, sometimes they cannot look like the baby that you're expecting them to from the movies you've seen, and get a little bit of a fright that they are in that state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but still on this last element for this question, and then we'll move on. But as a coach, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe this is one of your services, but if you're already a mom who already had a bad birthing experience, I believe you have a service that can help couples on how to reflect on that past experience and also help shift their mindset to move on or to make it more informed choices for future births. Do you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, sure, Amber. Sometimes women who have had a birth that's been traumatic can reflect on that birth with some very negative emotions. And I believe that's very unhealthy to start their parenting journey when they're feeling very disempowered by what's just transpired. Now, that can happen for a multiple of reasons. Either they weren't fully prepared for what was going to happen, or they've had a lot of medical intervention that they weren't expecting, or they did have the medical intervention and they just completely didn't understand what it was for and why maybe it was life-saving. And so from an experienced midwife who's been at thousands of births, from a woman's story, I can usually understand the medical side behind the layman's story and help them understand what happened, why it happened, and also if that was their first birth and they're feeling traumatized, to go back for a second birth. Put some strategies into place right from the very start that how they might be able to avoid some of those situations arising. And one classic example is you might have already made this mistake, Amber, giving people the exact due date. And so when people, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be critical of you here, but when you are 41 weeks, or people might be saying, oh, haven't you had that baby yet? And so in a woman's mind, she might be starting to doubt herself and start to think, oh, what's wrong with me? Why haven't I gone into labour? Why isn't my baby born? And start to kind of think, oh, well, maybe I do need to have an induction of labour. But what women don't realise is pregnancy is somewhere between 37 and 42 weeks is full term in Australia. So there are babies that are born at 43 and 44 weeks, but generally in a hospital you might find that the obstetricians are saying, oh, well, you're 41 weeks now, let's induce you. And so a woman, because she's got all this pressure from her family and friends, are saying, yes, let's do that. But if let nature take its course, she might have been one whose baby is not ready until 43 weeks to be born. So if a woman, when she first finds out she's pregnant, she might say to her family and friends, oh, I'm due early June, when her due date is, say, 29th of May. So she's kind of putting people off the scent right from the very word go, so she's not going to get harassed when she's already feeling like an elephant and feeling like she's never going to birth this baby. She doesn't have that peer and family pressure to get induced. So that's one simple little technique I teach women. And by the way, I don't really advocate going to 43 weeks, but but it's just kind of a story about, you know, the way a woman's body does function differently for different pregnancies, and the way you birth your babies and your gestation can be different from mine and from all of the listeners. Every woman is an individual, and every woman's gestation is different.
Yeah, it really is. And it's great that you touched on that. I'm not really bothered about the date. If I've said, yes, the due date's May 31st, but one of my biggest affirmations is the baby will come when the baby's ready to come, and that's literally my answer. And if people are asking, oh, I thought this was your call and tell me the baby, I'm like, no, I'll call you and tell you when the baby is. Don't ask. Like, the baby will come when the baby wants to come. And I'll actually say that over and over again to them so that they get that in their heads as well, because yeah, I'm not fussed by any of that, but I actually do have a pretty good solid barrier of what I actually let come in. And I think that's just been coming through personal development and a lot of other work that I've done. But that was one big thing I really did take on, that I noticed with hypnobirthing, of how people really do put on pressure and they don't realize they're doing it. They're just excited, and that's their beliefs of what birth can be like. But as an individual, you don't have to take their beliefs on. You have that choice. So yeah, making sure what affirmations or what mindset you want to have. And it's all like, I love that you said that every birthing journey is different, because it is. And even when you have your second or third child, that's going to be different too. So,
Exactly. Yes.
yeah. Well, let's move on to the next element, which is called having your lights on. Because one of the most important elements when rowing at dawn or dusk is for everyone's safety is to have lights on. And this is, however, when giving birth. In the hypnobirthing world, we want to cater for a calm environment. So lights are usually dim or off. What are other ways that women can alter the environment in a hospital or a home birth, doesn't matter, to make it more calming and relaxing for them?
Well, the environment is very, very important, because if you've got lots of lights on, that's stimulating the neocortex. It's kind of making women think, and if they can see the clock, they might glance up at it and realize, oh, it's 2 hours since I last looked at the clock, and how time is progressing. So I feel that when a woman can make that environment such that it's not stimulating her thinking process, so turning down the lights, absolutely, covering clocks. It might be having warmth in that room. So whether if you're in a hospital or in a home environment where you can turn up that heating so it's nice and warm, but as a woman's labouring body is working really hard, she starts to get hot, with the ability to be able to alter the temperature and maybe turn it down to a woman's comfort. Other things like having familiar things around. So if a woman's birthing at home, that's pretty easy because she's in her familiar environment. But if she's going into a hospital, take things in with her that are familiar. So using her own pillow, wearing her own clothes, maybe taking photos of things that remind her she's having a baby, pictures of the ultrasound. If she's done an affirmation board or a bunting with all her affirmations, take those up, hang those around the birthing room. Other things like maybe using salt lamps. If you're at home, obviously candles are fine, but in the hospital, you cannot use a naked flame. So those little LED candles, which are fairly cheap, getting those, a whole bunch of those and scattering those around the room, and it looks like you've got a room full of candles. That's beautiful. Or even the little battery-operated, like Christmas lights.
Mm-hmm.
They're very dim and they can be beautiful in a hospital setting. And I find not only is that great for the woman and her support person, but it's also really fantastic that if you've got medical staff walking into that room, and they should be knocking and coming in calmly and gently, but sometimes, let's face it, in a hospital that might not happen. But if they walk into that room and they see such a calm environment, it actually helps calm the disposition of the staff caring for a woman as well.
Yeah, massive. And just to give some tips of what I'm finding, and of course, please, let me know if you have any recommendations on top of it. But I've made my own playlist. So a lot of people didn't realize that you can bring in your own music into the hospitals. You definitely can. I have diffusers, so natural oils and remedies that I'm bringing in and
Perfect.
contracting. Yeah, so that's going to happen. And the other thing that I really want to just touch on is, and I know it kind of goes back to the vocab, but having a birth preference or a birth plan that's actually printed out and visible for the midwives to come through, or the obstetrician, or whomever is your support person, and that your support partner also knows it too. Could you explain what a birth plan versus a birth preference is?
Well, we kind of got a little bit wishy-washy and said, well, look, we can't plan a birth, so let's call it our preference list. And I kind of went with the preference list there for a while, but I've been reading recently a little bit of work by Millie Hill, who started the positive birth movement in the UK. And Millie describes life. And like, let's face it, Amber, we get to a certain part of our life and we reflect on, we had plans, but they didn't didn't pan out the way we planned. Something like a financial plan or a life plan, and I didn't plan that my mother would die before she saw all her grandchildren born. And things in life happen that aren't part of our plan. And birth is part of life. And so long as we understand that nothing always goes to plan, but if we don't have a plan, where are we heading? And there's a lovely saying that, how does it go? If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Mm-hmm. And so I actually have gone back to using the vocab of a birth plan, and we must understand this is not a legal document, and it's not like a contract of buying a house or something that will stand up in a court of law. This is what we want to happen, and it's got things on that like who's going to cut the cord, who's going to announce the gender of the baby, what music tracks I want on, but it also has what I don't want. And it might have things like, I don't want to have vaginal examinations unless they're absolutely necessary, or I don't want to have, vaccinations for my baby, or I do believe in vaccinations, by the way, but, some people don't. And they're the kind of things that need to go on a birth plan, what your strong beliefs are around what you do want. Yep. And what your strong beliefs are around what you don't want. I think they're the important things to have on a birth plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just a little side note, just for my own personality and my own personal sake, I found with the word plan, because it is all individual, right? Like, we just have to know that this is our ideal, but it may not go that way, right? That's the end of the day. As long as we're healthy and the baby's healthy, that's the most important. So it doesn't matter. But what I actually did was, rather than, I don't even use birth preference, I actually called it a birth wish. And this is what I'm wishing for. This is what I'm going for. Of course, if something goes wrong and the doctor, there's medically something affecting myself or my health or the baby's health, well then, we have to steer a different direction. But yeah, just taking off that pressure, because I personally, it was my personality. If I had a plan and I didn't stick to it, I could see how that could turn around in my own head for future births. And that's where I was like, I need to nip that now. And that's where the birth wish was just nice, light, gentle, and it just seemed to fit better with myself.
Yes, and I think that it's not a document written on a piece of paper that's important. It's the process of getting to what you want. So it's there's lots of things in birth that when you start learning either a good quality birthing class or Hypnobirthing Australia course, there's lots of topics that might arise that you think, oh, I didn't even know that was a possibility. Let me explore that with my birth partner, and let us think together, do we want that or do we not want that? And so it's actually the process of research and deciding what sits comfortably with you as a couple having a baby.
Oh, yeah, massive.
I recently had one of my clients, she had headed off rather quickly to her chosen hospital for birth. It was a very low intervention hospital, and she developed some medical complications and had to get transferred to another bigger facility where they could cope with her medical condition. And when she got there, she realised she hadn't even packed her birth plan in her bag. It was still sitting home on her kitchen table. But the thing is, her husband knew exactly what she wanted, knew exactly what she did not want, and he was able to still support her in what her birth plan was, even though they didn't have a piece of paper in their hand.
Yeah, and it's all about that communication with the birth partner, isn't it? Because that's one thing that Mick openly knows is I probably won't be talking, so he needs to be there talking for me and knows that. And if he's not there, then at least it's printed out and I've handed that to my midwife already, so it's in the file. But that's because of course Mick's not going to be there 100% all the time. If he has to go to the bathroom or go get food or something, there could be other people coming in and out. But it is that support and having that birth partner to be on board with you and knowing how to communicate that. So let's actually go to the next element, which is familiarize yourself with any pinch points in your local area. And that's the simple, come around the bend, right? We here in Australia, when you're rowing, you got to stay to the right. and you got to know when those are coming. This is very similar to labor because there's different pinpoints around the bend that will make some more intensity at different times. How do you help women and birth partners to mentally and physically overcome these known behaviors are going to happen?
Good question. This is a really challenging thing. Um, as a very experienced midwife, I have been with thousands of women in labour and birth, and everyone kind of has a similar way of progressing in labour. I mean, some are fast, some are slow, some don't cope, some do cope. Like there's a lot of differences, but there is a transition in every woman's labour, and it is where labour is intensifying. Like it keeps ramping up a step. Just when you think you've got it and you're coping, then a little bit more intensity hits in, and it takes it to that next level, and women start to doubt their ability to cope. So what I find is preparing them for what's to come when I'm in the birthing room, and just saying, now the next thing that's going to happen is this. And around about that kind of 8 to 9 centimetre dilation, women tend to get a surge of adrenaline. Now, you've been learning in your hypnobirthing training that we don't want adrenaline in early labour because that's our fight and flight, that's our fear response. But that's actually what primes a baby ready for birth. And we naturally get a surge of adrenaline, and it's not from fear, it's just from labour. We get this surge around about that transition, that 8, 9 centimetres, and a lot of women get shaky. They get this overwhelming fear creeping in. They get this impending doom. They get this feeling of I'm going to die, which is a terrible thing, but that's a surge of adrenaline. And I've told women that this is what it is. It's not you. It's just your body creating this adrenaline. And this is going to prime your baby's lungs ready for its first breath when it comes. And so understanding that there are some benefits to some of these yucky kind of feelings in labour, and understanding that this is normal, and that's really helpful for when they reach those pinch points in their labour.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you guys like part of your course? Do you actually have tips and tricks for couples so that maybe it's in different positions or practicing different breathing techniques at different corners of the bend, or natural ways of relieving pain? Like acupressure or any of that. Do you go into?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I think one of the really important things is touch. And yes, a lot of acupressure techniques are helpful. But one of the things is when you do something repeatedly, time after time after time, it builds this pattern, and you can have this association with a certain touch or a certain action means something. So when couples have practiced on a daily basis for the last 6 or 8 weeks before birth, and one of the things that we teach in hypnobirthing is the shoulder press, like a trigger point for a woman to just remind her to let go and to relax. And if you want to, if couples have chosen something else, but we generally in the Hypnobirthing Australia course teach the shoulder press, and the partner, the birth support person, watches a woman and can see that they may be getting a little bit anxious, and building up that towards the birth, and just telling her to relax, let go, just surrender to what's happening in her body. And it can trigger that endorphin flow again, and the endorphins are about 20 to 40 times more powerful than morphine, and just it's so calming for a woman because she can be building up into that state of anxiety and adrenaline, and it just sets her right back into that good place again, and it just floods her mind with all those memories of, yes, this is okay, I am all right, I am safe, I am on track, and okay, this is tough, but I can do this. And
Yeah.
that touch from her birth support person that just reminds her how strong she is really powerful.
Absolutely, I love that. And thanks, even when you said about the birth partner's been practicing for the last 6 to 8 weeks. Yeah, no, definitely Mick and I haven't done that. So I was like, oh, shoot. But I think we'll just wing it and we'll go with it. But yes, I'll get him to listen to this recording. That will help.
Perfect.
The final element, which is keep away from ferries, because the waves from the ferry can actually capsize the boat. So I was just wondering, because hypnobirthing has an analogy about waves and labor. Do you mind just explaining what that visualization is and how they use that?
Right. Well, most people are familiar with the beach. And Melissa Spilstead, who's written the Hypnobirthing Australia course, lives in Queensland. She's on the beach. It's just her backyard. It's very familiar. For me, I've had childhood holidays at the beach, and everybody has had some experience with the beach, and hopefully it's been positive and they're not scared of the waves. But when you think of in the very shallow waves, they're just little, they're lapping at your feet, they're quite fun to run through and dance over, and it's easy. And you get out a little bit deeper and they're up around your knees and they're still quite okay, but you get out really deep to where the waves are breaking, where it's really, the waves are really harsh. I've just recently done a surfing course, and trying to get myself and my surfboard out through these big waves is really, really hard. And they come crashing over you, and you've got this salt water up your nose and in your mouth, and it can be really awful. And fighting against those waves, because they are building and they're getting stronger the deeper you get. And it's a little bit like labour. The deeper you get, the further you get into labour, the stronger those waves are and the harsher they come crashing over you. And trying to fight against those waves makes it really hard. So when you're thinking about these big, strong waves, if you can surrender to them, and if you can just embrace the intensity of them, because past those waves is the calm. Past those strong waves is where your baby will be born. And you can either breathe, go underneath, and just stay under that wave while it's crashing over on top, and then you can emerge from the other side of the wave. And it makes it much more bearable when you surrender to that wave rather than fighting against it. So that's kind of my analogy with the waves there.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it makes a huge difference just by thinking that way and having that visualization. It's massive, because the wave does go eventually, right? That surge does calm down and you do get that calm on the other side. So that's great. The waves can, and I hope you don't mind me using the same analogy, but I feel like those waves can not only happen during labor, but most certainly after labor, when we're now parents, and we're now at home with the newborn, or either we have a newborn and an additional child, and we're doing that integration with other children, which is also known as the fourth trimester. What are some recommendations for couples to take what they've learned from hypnobirthing into parenting at home?
Well, I've got 1,000 things racing through my mind here, Amber. It's like, which one will I tell you first? Like there's breastfeeding. Babies need to be fed. And Melissa has a beautiful affirmation on the website for breastfeeding. So that's awesome to listen to help keep you in that calm state of mind during that breastfeeding. The fourth trimester is very important, because I believe that little human babies are so weak, not weak, but they're vulnerable. They're not really ready to come earthside at 9 months. When we look at other mammals, like you see dolphins, the minute they're born, they're swimming around with their mothers, little kittens. It only takes them a few moments, and they're walking and they're helping themselves to feeding from their mother's teat. Human babies, takes them about 12 months before they can start walking. It takes them quite a while before they can actually help themselves to the breast. And there's a lot of their anatomy that's not really fully developed at birth as well, like their little sphincter, the muscle at the top of their stomach doesn't develop for about 3 or 4 months. And that's why little newborn babies are often vomiting frequently, or their little tummies are the size of a marble and they can only take in 2 or 3 mils of colostrum at a start. And it's not until they're a week of age that their stomach has developed to about the size of of a ping pong ball. And that's when they can maybe take in 10 to 15 mils at a time. So their stomachs fill and empty very frequently. Before birth, they've been getting here's a little joke, constant womb service. So
Yes.
the umbilical vessels, they've been constantly giving them nutrients 24 hours a day. And after birth, they have to start feeding, and they can only take in little bits at a time, and they digest that very quickly. So understanding for the first 3 months of a baby's life, they're missing that constant feeding. They're also missing the uterus being so closely wrapped around them and that they can barely move. So being swaddled, being held close to their parents, they're missing the sound of mum's heartbeat, mum's breathing, mum's bowel. It's all there right in close proximity to a baby. And when they're in an environment that is airy, that's unfamiliar. It's quiet, that's unfamiliar. When there's a lot of space around them, that's unfamiliar. When they've got clothes on, that's all unfamiliar. So some babies transition from life before birth to life after birth as being quite smooth, and they adapt quite easily, and they're kind of looked at as good babies. And there are others babies that transition through that, and it's a little bit shocking for them, and their senses are a little bit overwhelmed, and they find that a little harder. And people label them as, it's a bad baby because it doesn't sleep very long. And let's face it, you're not going to get a full night's sleep for a long time after the birth of a baby, and that's quite normal. Babies will be feeding frequently, and before birth you're actually priming them to feed more frequently at night, because when you lie down and you sleep at night, you get a lot better blood supply to the uterus, so baby's getting more food. And one of my gorgeous lactation consultant friends, she says the best thing a woman can do for herself and her baby after it's born is, before birth, have an afternoon nap every day, because then you're starting to get that baby into a rhythm of actually having another period of time during the 24-hour cycle where they're getting more constant feeding. And that does help for after birth, that when they're in your arms, they might want to feed more frequently in the periods of time where you've been lying down before birth. So if you can make that during the day as well, much easier for after.
Beautiful. That's fantastic, Deborah. Thank you so much. Honestly, we could keep chatting, but I do know we're definitely over time now. So I just wanted to wrap it up. If there's anything else from today's row you'd like to add, please say so now, because you're just a solid wealth of knowledge.
Oh, I could go on hours and hours, Amber. I'm so passionate about every woman's birth being the most positive experience it can be, because birth is the beginning of parenting. And I think the preparation that we put into any big event in life, for people who've had a wedding, what investment in time and energy did you put into that because you wanted it to go well? Or a first overseas holiday, you've had to put in a lot of preparation. And I think birth is an event in a woman's life that she will always look back on. And I want every woman to look back on her birth with a sense of pride and achievement in what she's done, not in a sense of trauma. So I think it's in every woman's best interest to really seek out some quality birth education, and I absolutely believe that the Hypnobirthing Australia is the best. But there are lots of good courses around, but get quality independent birth education. Don't just rock up to the hospital and think that the hospital childbirth education is going to teach you what you know, because you don't rock up to a bank manager and ask, how are you going to invest your money? Getting independent birth education is paramount. And I just want to wish every woman listening the best, most amazing birth possible.
Yeah, and even if there's males listening too, right? This is something that you could always suggest to your partner, because hypnobirthing, it's still a new thing out there. Not everyone knows. So it's just another option that may or may not work for you, but it's definitely a possibility. Yeah, thank you so much, Deborah. It was amazing to have you on the show. I'm sure our listeners are wondering, how the heck can they get in touch with you? How can they work with you? How can they take your course? So please let us know, and anything that you share, I'll put in the show notes as well.
Sure. Well, I am in Bendigo in central Victoria, but if anyone heads along to the Hypnobirthing Australia website, just plugs in their postcode, they'll find where the nearest Hypnobirthing Australia practitioner is in their area. And if they can't find someone locally, there's always the online course available.
Okay, great. And what about your individual services too? Because you have your own birth preference and services too. How can they book those with you? Because can they do that over the phone or online, or it has to be in person?
Absolutely. They can. I can do Skype appointments with people. They can find my contact details on my Facebook page or on my webpage, Empowered to Birth. Just put that in your search engine and you'll find me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Deborah, for being on the show once again. Absolutely an honor to have you here. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Amber. It's been great.
No problem. And thank you so much, listeners, for listening to today's episode. We really appreciate and love you all. If you've enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, or follow us on your chosen platform. And of course, share it with anyone you could see benefiting from it. For those who are brand new listening to our show, you can find us on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Podbean, and Spotify. And we'll be releasing our next episode every Monday. So have a great week, guys, and look forward to having you tune in then. Take care. Bye.